Hello everybody. I hope you had a great spring break and enjoyed that week off. So yeah, we're back into week 3 already. Crazy, right? So I'm going to minimize this screen here in a second, and we are going to go over a couple of housekeeping things. We're going to talk a little bit about what we did the last 2 weeks, catch up on that, and then move forward with week 3 and all of the assignments and things to go over with that. So this might be a long video. I'm going to try not to keep you all too long, but the good thing is that we're on YouTube, so you can always pause this video, go back to it, save it. You could basically watch it in multiple sittings is what I'm getting at. So if it's a bit long for your tastes, you can always split it up into segments. I find that works pretty well. But yeah, let me minimize this and we will go ahead and start talking about the class. So, here is our course. If you have not seen where the lecture videos are, they are going to be right here in this space. I would encourage you each week to make sure that you are watching the lecture videos. I go over quite a bit in them, and there is a lot of things that will be on your test that are in these lecture videos. There are a lot of questions about assignments, about due dates that I answer in these lecture videos. And basically, if you email me and ask me a question that I have answered in the lecture video, I'm basically going to tell you to go back and watch the lecture video. So, good rule of thumb, right? But they will be posted here. If you've not watched week 1's lecture video, you probably should. It's not terribly long. But yeah, you can see all of the handouts and resources on this right side of the paper by scrolling down, or you can go to the resources tab to see it as well, as everything is listed by order of week. And you can look at both the documents and links for each week under resources. But first, let's go to course content. So, our first discussion forum has passed, along with the assignments that were due by Sunday. It shows that I have not submitted these assignments because I did not submit them in the test in the test module. So you'll be able to tell if you've submitted all of the assignments or not, because if you have, there will be this little check mark beside it. If you have not, it will still show up here. All right. And after each week, the weeks themselves only stay open for a little bit, and then they will close themselves out, and they will look like that. So spring break, we didn't have any assignments. We also had an upgrade, so I was not able to get on here during that upgrade, which is why this video is a little bit late. I usually try to have everything posted by Monday night, but with this week coming back from spring break and catching up, Tuesday night it is. So for this week, what is due? The big thing is our paper 1. Your narrative and or fiction nonfiction paper is due by Sunday, Sunday, March 24th. All right, so that's listed right there. How you submit the paper is if I click on the Dropbox here, it will let me upload a file. When I upload, I choose it from this little Moxie window here. If your paper is not saved in here, you can upload it from your computer by clicking this. And you can, let's say, I go to Tweak and upload. I already have a file named Tweak, so it'll ask if I want to override it. I can if I want. Once it's finished uploading, it will the insert button here will light up. I can click insert. I can label it if I want, and then I do add file. And now it shows that I have a file uploaded. So if I click this button, it will let me turn that paper in. Please make sure that you are checking the titles of your files and checking your files before you submit them. Because once I submit this paper, I will show you, once I've submitted it, I can no longer add any new files. So you're pretty much stuck with whatever you entered. So make sure that it is the correct file. If you happen to submit the wrong file, let's say you turn this paper in this week on Wednesday or Thursday, just let me know right then and there, and I will be able to open your Dropbox back up. But if you wait until Sunday night, there is a good chance I will not be able to open the box back up, and you will be stuck with whatever file you submitted. So please make sure you check ahead of time before you submit the file, and then I can click on it like here and view it afterwards to make sure that it's the correct file. Okay? So anyway, That's paper 1. This is worth 100 points, so it's a huge assignment. Make sure you definitely turn in paper 1. The second thing due is our reading response number 2. If I click on it, it is also due Sunday night. If I click on it, it shows the instructions here. So there is a YouTube video that I want you to watch. It's about 13 minutes long. I think that you all will really enjoy it. It's from Lindsay Ellis. She was known as the Nostalgia Chick back in the day. And now she's my age, and now she does basically different video essays about various movies, various books, and she's pretty awesome. And she does a really cool segment about nostalgia and Stranger Things in this video. So she doesn't give any spoilers to Stranger Things, so don't worry about that. But you'll be able to click on the video, it'll take you to it. When you're done watching the video, your reading response should answer these 3 questions. Alright? And then it's due by Sunday night as well. And you upload it the exact same way that you uploaded paper number 1. Okay? So this assignment is worth 20 points. The third assignment due this week is our discussion forum. The discussion forum, your posts are always due on Friday, so please make sure you get those in on time. And then your responses are not due until Sunday. But in all honesty, if everyone posts by Friday, everyone should be able to get their responses and their posts all done on Friday, which would be awesome because that means that assignment is done for you and you don't have to worry about it. So the discussion forum this week, if I click on it, it will take me to the discussion forum. There are 2 files here, Beautiful Boy and Tweak. I have uploaded 2 versions of these files in the hopes that one of them will work because I've had students complain in the past that they haven't. I've also emailed you these files. Now, I can open any of these up and they upload fine. I do have Adobe Acrobat, which allows me to view PDF files. These are PDFs. So if you do not have a PDF reader, you might want to consider downloading one, but you shouldn't have to. They should open up. Now this first file for both Beautiful Boy and Tweak is a large file, which as you'll notice, it's taking it a long time to load. But here in a moment, it should pop up. I included 2 versions of the same passage just to see if at least one of them would upload quicker for you than the other. So we'll see here in a second if this uploads exactly like it should. I really like these 2 passages. Beautiful Boy and Tweak were 2 novels that I read in one of my graduate classes. We read them in the same class. Our class was split in 2, and one half read Beautiful Boy first, the other half read Tweak first. And the interesting thing is that these stories are basically the same situation told from a father's perspective in Beautiful Boy and the son's perspective in Tweak. And so they're dealing with very similar issues and similar situations, but they're coming at it from 2 very different styles, 2 very different point of views, and it's kind of like the same content told in different ways. So I'm excited for us to look at these passages and for you to answer the questions in the discussion forum to hear what you said. See? So you'll notice that in this first file, it's a little blurred, but you should be able to read it from here. Yeah. So the file should open up. They open up for my computer, but like I said, if you don't have an Adobe Acrobat or a PDF reader, then it may be difficult to open up the files. But I did email you all an extra copy of these so you could see. And look at Samantha. Look at her being ahead of the game. Already posting in the forum. Awesome. So you at least have one person you can respond to. Alright, so if I go back to course content, we have one more assignment that is due this week, and that is your fiction exam. Now, I'm going to press this and open it. I will be honest with you all, I was not an exam taker in college. I would much rather write a paper than take a test any day. So when I say exam, these exams are pretty basic. Alright, so I will click. You'll notice on here that there is no time limit. You do not have a time limit on this exam, but you can only take it one time. So it's out of 25 points. When I click on it, it will open up. Alright, so no time limit. There's only 13 questions. I don't make these exams terribly difficult. If you have your textbook and you watch these lecture videos and you take notes from the presentations, you should get 100% on this exam. It's pretty much open book. And as long as you watch the videos, you should have all the answers in those. So you can see there's multiple choice, there are some true and false, there's some matching, and there's a couple of short answer questions. Once you click this button at the very bottom, that will submit the exam and you can no longer go back, change it, or alter it in any way. If, let's say, you're working on this test, you get down here to question number 3 or 4, and then all of a sudden you get called into work, or something happens and you have to get out of the test, and you're like, I'm not done, what do I do? There is a save progress feature. All you have to do is make sure you click the save progress. It will show when you saved it. You can click this as many times as you want. Just make sure that it gives you a time. And then once that time is on there, you can click exit the exam. And what it will show you is that you can either resume the exam where you left off and where you saved it at, or you can turn it in as is. Do not press this button. Don't do it. Click the light blue button to resume. Alright? And it will tell you that progress hasn't been saved. Well, it has. Just not when you reopened it. As long as you can keep saving this test and coming back to it as many times as you want. Just note that once you click this button at the bottom, or once you click this dark blue button on the side here, you will have turned in the test and you can't go back and change it. So just make sure you have everything done that you need to before you turn the test in. Alright? It's due Sunday as well. So as far as our assignments go, you only have one thing due by Friday, and that is the discussion forum post. Your responses, let me go back here, your responses, your reading response, your paper, your exam, all of those are due by Sunday. But I would not wait until Sunday to complete all of these assignments. Otherwise, you're going to be really working hard on that Sunday. I would try to pace yourself, maybe get the test done during the week, get the discussion forum done during the week, and then that leaves you with just turning in the paper and the response by Sunday. So it's totally up to you all what you all want to do, but I would pace myself in this class and don't wait till the last minute to get everything done, because something may happen and then you're not able to complete the work on time, and I don't accept late work. So just keep that in mind, all right? So with that being said, please feel free to email me with any questions. Also, one quick note. You'll notice when you get on course content that it shows you 2 assignments that are due next. And that seems legit, right? The thing is, this little box will only ever put 2 assignments listed. You need to scroll down to week 3 to see everything that is due. Okay? You need to do that every week, because it's only going to show you 2 assignments up here, not the other ones. And you need to make sure that you see what all assignments you are going to do in this class. Okay? So just wanted to give you all a heads up about that. Alright, so now that we've talked about that, we can dive into our fiction presentations for this week. We are finishing up fiction, as it were. Crazy stuff, right? So, just a second. This calls for some t-shirt action. Alright, so we are going to talk about fiction and finish it up this week with 2 presentations. One is going to talk about prose on theme and style, and the other one is going to talk about symbolism. So the first thing we want to do is look at chapters 5 and 6, which talks about point of view and symbolism. And this one's fairly short. You'll notice by now that most of our textbook deals with example stories, and that these presentations that we do for the lecture video are mostly going to be about terminology. Just going back over everything and making sure that we understand what terms mean, how they're used, so on and so forth. So, the narrator in the story is basically the one who observes the events. And they're the ones that we see the story through. And there's various types of narrators. Probably one of the most common narrators is the limited narrator. And the limited narrator only knows what the reader knows, or the reader only knows what the limited narrator knows. So, probably the most modern, simple example is The Hunger Games. Katniss is a limited narrator. She only knows what she knows about the world around her, and as the Hunger Games go on, we see her story through her perspective, and we get to learn things as she learns them. So that's a limited narrator. The opposite of that is what we call an omniscient narrator, and they are all-knowing. Usually that narrator is maybe God, maybe it's a spirit, a presence, or it's just a force that knows what's going on. So we kind of see the story through their eyes, but they already know how the story goes. Often omniscient narration is in past tense, whereas limited narration is in present. An intruding narrator is one that can comment. They can, quote, break the fourth wall. Two examples I would think of an intruding narrator. One would be Deadpool. Deadpool is an extremely modern intruding narrator who breaks the fourth wall and pokes fun at the audience and knows that he's in a story. The other example would be I have younger cousins, so I watch a lot of Disney. The Emperor's New Groove, where Cusco, the prince that gets turned into a llama, he actually stops the story and like points out things on the screen and like X's stuff out. That is an intruding narrator. So those two examples are pretty good modern ones for that type of narration. Then we have third person objective. This narrator is very matter of fact. It's very removed. Think of documentaries. So Morgan Freeman narrating March of the Penguins. That would be a third-person objective. And then we have two first-person narrators. We have the autobiographical and the observer. The autobiographical first-person narrator is very much like a diary, like a confession. They can have a persona that they put on, but they speak to us as if they're just writing everything down or leaving us messages. Whereas the first-person observer is very similar to the limited narrator in that everything happens in real time and in the present. So you can kind of see some overlapping, like the first-person observer is very similar to the limited narrator, and that's okay. There can be some overlap here. These are all just different types of point of view that we can encounter in a story. So we've talked a little bit about interior monologue. We will talk more about this when we get to drama, but stream of consciousness is when a narrator's mind is just free-flowing and jumps from one idea to the next. Often when a story seems very dreamlike, like Alice in Wonderland, that's because the narrator is very stream of consciousness. Whereas an interior monologue is everything's just happening in the character's mind. There's not really any linear timeline, there's not really any focal point, it's just everything's happening in the character's head, and so we just kind of see things through their perspective specifically. And we'll talk more about how this is manifested in the theater realm when we get to drama in our third unit. Symbolism is huge in literature, and you could honestly do a whole class just on symbols in literature. So there are various types of symbols. One is a shared language. So I'm going to go down this list here. Shared language is a symbol that a culture can identify with. So an example of that would be a stoplight. When you're driving on the road and you see a stoplight go from green to yellow to red, there are no words on the stoplight telling us to stop and go and slow down, but we as a culture understand the symbolism behind that stoplight. So it's a shared language symbol. Symbols can have personal meaning. So Matt Groening, who created The Simpsons, he is actually from Springfield, Illinois, and he named a lot of his characters in The Simpsons after streets. So Homer Simpson is named after Homer Street in Springfield. So there's not really any specific meaning attached to that symbol, but it's something that means something to Matt Groening, to the creator of The Simpsons. It gives his characters kind of a personal connection that only he really gets the symbolism of. So symbols can be rich in association, meaning that they have more than one meaning. So colors can be symbols that are rich in association. For example, in Western culture, we wear white at weddings because they symbolize purity and divinity. Whereas in Eastern cultures, you might wear red to symbolize love. And white actually may be a symbol of death for Eastern cultures. So they just have multiple meanings depending on where you're at when the story takes place. Ambiguous symbols are symbols that don't have a direct or clear meaning. I've really gotten into Twin Peaks in the last year. I know it's from the 90s and I'm way behind the game, but it's a really fun show. It's pretty weird. But trees in Twin Peaks have a very ambiguous meaning. I get that there's some symbolism with them, but it's never completely spelled out in black and white. There's a little bit of ambiguity there. And then finally we have full context, symbols that don't necessarily have a full meaning until the end of the story. And much like our limited narrator, I'm going to go back to the Hunger Games and say that the Mockingjay would be an example of a symbol that doesn't really get its full context until the last book of the series. So yeah, these are just various types of symbols and how you would encounter them in a story. The central symbol of a story is where the symbol becomes something the entire story actually revolves around and depends upon, and it kind of becomes the focal point of the story. And probably my favorite example of this would be the show Downton Abbey. If you've ever watched Downton Abbey, it is about a giant mansion where this wealthy family lives, and each floor of the mansion represents or symbolizes a different class of British society. So the house itself becomes a central symbol, and that everything surrounding the house has a specific meaning, and it becomes the focal point of the story. So that's why I used it there. The two other terms I have on here deal with symbolism. One is naturalism, where we look at stories through a raw, unabashed filter. So Jack London, he wrote To Build a Fire, and he's wrote a lot of stories about man versus nature. And in those stories, a lot of times, nature will have a symbolic representation or a meaning beyond itself, and that's naturalism. The other term is social protest, where symbolism has a political or social agenda attached to it. So the two stories I put down for social protest would be The Grapes of Wrath or Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. Both I would highly recommend for very different reasons. The Jungle by Upton Sinclair was about labor standards in Chicago during the early 1910s, 1920s. It is fascinating, the accounts of how horrible working conditions were. And the book was very political, but it was also very effective. The president at the time actually read The Jungle and was so moved by what he read that he actually went out and lobbied to get legislation passed that protected people working in these factories. So it was just a fictional story that had huge social impacts. The other one is The Grapes of Wrath. My friend recommended it to me years ago, and it was one of those books that I never read in high school, so I thought, yeah, I'll read it. It is all about the Great Depression and this family that moves from the East Coast to California looking for work and looking for a way out of the Depression. It's a very long book. It's a very sad book. And when I got to the end of the story, I actually chucked the book across the room in anger because I was so mad with how it ended. And we'll talk more about that when we get to some of our future chapters. But let's just say if you want a book that's going to make you very befuddled by the end, Grapes of Wrath will definitely do that. Alright, so that is our chapters 5 and 6 and the terminologies that go with symbolism and point of view. The other one I wanted us to look at is the chapters on theme and style, the final elements of fiction here. So when we talk about theme, we talk about what is the meaning or purpose behind the story. And every story should have a theme, whether it's simplistic, whether it's complex. You should answer these questions with your story. So you should say, what do you want your readers to take with them when they're done reading the story? What do you want them to learn, if anything? And then what was the overall impression you wanted them to have? So basically, what do you want your readers to walk away from your story feeling like, knowing, and taking away? So, and it can be that you just wanted to entertain them, or it could be that you have a very important message that you're trying to present in your story. Both ways are fine. There's no wrong answer. But every story should have a meaning or purpose. Otherwise, what's the point in reading it, right? So you do want to avoid a few things when you're thinking about theme. One is that you want to avoid large abstractions. That's when things are maybe misleading or too foggy or overgeneralized. If your reader has to ask, what's the point? Then it might be that your theme is too vague. If they can't figure it out, it might be a little bit too vague for them, and you might need to be a little bit more specific in your theme. But the opposite can happen. You don't want to treat your audience like they're dumb. You don't want to treat your audience like they can't figure it out. You want to give them some mystery, some intrigue, so that they can put the puzzle pieces together to figure out what your story is. these guys that I watch that review movies, they constantly talk about the moment where the theme's oversimplified and it's almost like the director saying, "Do you get it? Look what I did." And they're like, that takes the whole fun out of watching the film or reading the book, because then you already know how it ends and it's too simplified for the reader. So just make sure that unless you're writing for a younger age group, that, or if the text calls for a simplified theme, that you don't make your story too simple, because it will lose your audience's interest. And then finally, you want to avoid cliches, which are similar to archetypes, but they are stereotypes or tropes that have been overdone. They're common features in a story, and they're just kind of boring, you know? I think that we do a really good job in modern fiction of varying up tropes, varying trends, subverting expectations. I think that most modern fiction tries to not be cliche, you know? We have stories like Romeo and Juliet and classics where they have a cliche theme because they were the first ones, so it's fair that they have that theme, but I think that we can, as modern writers, stick with tried and true themes. We need to branch out and be experimental and try new things. Long story short, with theme, it's about a delicate balance. Know your audience. Know what they're expecting. If your audience is expecting a comedy, make it funny. If they're expecting a horror story, make it scary. Know what your audience is expecting and try to engage with them. And that will allow your genre to kind of create a more challenging theme. All right, style. Chapter 308, or Chapter 8 on page 308. Style is the way that a writer uses language to create his or her reality. And this is definitely the most subjective of all of the elements of prose. This is the one you can really tweak with the most, because there's really no set in stone style that anyone has to use. It just makes a statement and creates a mood through the language and formatting that you use in your story. So there are types of style listed on page 310. You have understatement, which is when an author uses minimal or simplistic language and lets their audience kind of fill in the blanks for themselves. It's not to be confused with minimalism, though. Minimalism is deliberately simplistic. Understatement is using short or simplistic language to create a broader statement. So, for example, Kurt Vonnegut's book, The Slaughterhouse-Five, is one of my favorites. And in it, he talks about in World War I all these bad things happening. And whenever things in his story get to be really rough, grim, or desperate, he'll just end the sentence with, "So it goes." It's a really simple sentence, "so it goes," but it has a big weight to it in the context of what he's talking about. So it's kind of like an understatement. It has so much more weight, but it's such a small, simple word that the audience can kind of determine their own meaning out of that phrase. Formal is the opposite, and that is when authors use very lavish and rich terminology to elevate the vocabulary and describe the story in great detail. Charles Dickens was a huge proponent of formal style. That man could describe a blade of grass in a paragraph, which it kind of made sense at the time because Charles Dickens was paid by the word for several of his stories, so the man was like, "Challenge accepted. I can write a long story." And then finally we have hyperbole, which is an exaggeration of language. So it's making things more dramatic, more suspenseful, putting in extra oomph to grab the audience's attention. We have abstract versus concrete on page 311. Concrete is pretty simple. It's anything that's tangible and in reality. So chairs or hair or earth or lava, anything that your senses can interact with is concrete. Abstract are non-tangible feelings, so emotions, thoughts, ideas. So everyone pretty much knows what hair is. I couldn't ask you, what is this, and you say anything but hair, right? But if I ask you, what is happiness to you? Everyone's definition of happiness is a little bit different, whereas everyone's definition of hair is about the same. So abstract things cannot be felt, they can't be seen, they can't be touched, they can't be tasted or smelled. They simply have to be interacted within the mind. All right. So we also have denotation versus connotation. Denotation, I always associate denotation dictionary. So denotation is the dictionary matter-of-fact definition. So, for example, a flag. It's a piece of fabric of various colors that's attached to a wooden or metal pole. Simple enough. Connotation is the emotional or symbolic meaning behind a word. So a flag can represent a country, a culture, pride, a state of territory. It can have an emotional meaning as well as a literal meaning. Speaking of literal, literal, and I made this a little bit small here, literal is something that's grounded in reality, whereas figurative is something that's implied but not necessarily real. And we use the word figurative, I think, more than we realize. You might be like, oh, I'm mad as a wet hen, figuratively speaking. Meaning that, you're not really a wet hen, you're not really that mad, but you're just, kind of figuratively, you're just implying that you're extremely mad. And that leads us to metaphors and similes. Metaphors are comparing two or more things, without using the phrase like or as, whereas a simile does compare two or more things using like or as. So I feel we use similes quite a bit in our culture because we have adopted the word like it's a second sibling, and are just like, what I just said. We just say things, like, she's like the wind. It was like the worst thing ever. We just use the word like a lot, so I think it's really easy to come up with a simile. Metaphors, I think, are a little bit harder, because you cannot use like or as. So, in the words of Shakespeare, all the world's a stage. You could say, that boy was a pig pen. You can basically create metaphors pretty easily as well, but I think similes come easier to our culture because of the amount of times we use the word like in our vocabulary. Dialogue is often a form of style, not symbolism, a form of style. It's a stylistic choice. You do not have to have dialogue in your story. None of your paper number ones have to have dialogue in them at all. But you are very welcome to use it as well. The big thing about dialogue is that when you are writing it, make sure that you include the proper punctuation and you put the punctuation in the proper place. So, like here I have, hello, she waved to him. Because this comma is part of this sentence here, I will put it between the quotation marks. So I have quotation mark, hello, comma, quotation mark, she waved to him. Quotation mark, oh, comma, quotation mark, he stammered, nearly dropping his books, comma, hey. So note that the punctuation here is on the inside of the quotation marks, but when you have the punctuation over here, it's outside. So just make note of that, okay? And you will get a chance to revise paper one, so if you do some formatting errors on the dialogue, I'll correct them for you. It'll be all right. Parallelism and sentimentality are two terms on page 312. Parallelism has to deal with repeating similar elements of grammar or building a rhythm or emotion to hammer home a point. So it's where your story ends similarly than when it began. There was a movie recently called Fury that came out. It was about World War II, had Brad Pitt and Shia LaBeouf. It had a lot of parallelism. It starts kind of on the same note that it ends, which I thought was pretty interesting. And I'll talk more about Fury in later chapters as well. Sentimentality is deliberately making an audience feel sadness or pity for a character in a story. So if you're really trying to tug at the heartstrings, you are using sentimentality. And a lot of authors do it. And it works. So, here are two examples of parallelism versus sentimentality. This movie right here is called Grave of the Fireflies. If you want to make yourself cry, go watch it. I watched it for a class in college. It's basically about this boy and his sister, and they live in Japan during World War II, and it's kind of from their perspective. Their father's off fighting in the war, and their mother dies in a bombing. So it's pretty heavy stuff, but it starts in a similar way that it ends. Like these are the opening shots of the film, and these are the ending shots of the film. Spoilers, it doesn't end well. But it's a really good movie if you get a chance to see it, but it is notably very sad. And then we have sentimentality, which is, in this case, this scene is also really sad. It's from John Wick. So if you've ever seen John Wick, you know that he gets a puppy. The puppy has an emotional connection to him for another reason than just being a puppy, and something bad happens to the puppy. So it's pretty sad. But that is a deliberate use of sentimentality to get us to feel empathy for the main character through this tragic act that has happened. Irony is talked about in Chapter 8, and our textbook has various definitions of irony. I'm not a fan of many of them, but I do like the way that this chapter talks about irony. It talks about it being the sad and comic contrast between expectation and event, between ideal and reality. And I think that's a pretty good definition of irony. It's the opposite of what we expect to happen. Okay? And so what I have here is an example from 500 Days of Summer, which is a movie that came out several years ago. But it's a really good movie. And in it, our main character, played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, has been in this on and off relationship with Summer, played by Zooey Deschanel. And he's invited to her party, and as the scene starts, he thinks that the story is going to go one way. And so we see what Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character is expecting on one side of the screen, and we see reality on the other side of the screen. And it's a really, really effective scene. So what I want to do is show you all that scene very quickly, and we're almost to the end here. But I want to show you that scene real quick before we move on. This is from 500 Days of Summer. You can see we have expectations on one side and reality on the other.
That's so nice. Thank you so much. Yes, I agree.
So Tom, what is it that you do?
I write greeting cards.
Tom could be a really great architect if he wanted to be.
That's unusual. I mean, what made you go from one to the other?
I guess I just figured, why make something disposable like a building when you can make something that lasts forever, like a greeting card?
So yeah. So yeah, the whole point of this scene is to kind of show that difference between expectation and reality. And I really think the movie does a great job of doing that. Of showing that irony that he thinks everything's going to go this way, and then nope, sure doesn't. But yeah, that's kind of just an overview, a connection to irony there. Postmodern style is talked about on page 315, a style of writing that knows what it is. And I would say that last scene from that movie is a very postmodern clip because the movie knows it's doing expectation versus reality. We hear the word postmodern thrown around a lot in modern literature, and I think that's because we actually have genres. We have types of writing. If we were back in Victorian England in the 1800s, we wouldn't call it Victorian literature, we would just call it literature. Because, I would argue before the 1920s, 1930s, literature wasn't defined into various genres. There weren't Barnes and Nobles where you could go and pick out multiple books depending on their genre. There was just literature, and audiences, it was kind of a more elite thing to be able to access books far different than the way we can access them now. So postmodern was actually developed around the 1930s and on as a way of identifying, writers could identify the styles of writing that they were creating. And it kind of defined how we look at books now. Now we can pick out a book based on its style, whereas, 100 years ago, that wasn't necessarily the case. And then we finally have absurd versus surreal on page 331. So these two terms are very similar, but they're also very different. So absurd is when there are elements out of place in the reality of the story. So I use the example of SpongeBob because there are elements in SpongeBob that are real. Starfish are real, sponges are real, burgers are real. However, fish don't necessarily wear clothing like that. Sponges and starfish don't ride in boats made out of hamburgers. So there's elements of reality that are just in the wrong place. They're kind of in an order they shouldn't be. Whereas surreal is when things are dreamlike, hallucinogenic elements. So here we have from Winnie the Pooh, we have heffalumps, which heffalumps don't really exist, but they are the Winnie the Pooh version of elephants. So it's something very dreamlike, imaginative. It's not really grounded in reality, basically. And yeah, that is pretty much it for fiction and nonfiction. Ta-da! So, yes, if you have any questions at all about what we're doing this week in class, please let me know. Your assignments are in course content. Please make sure that you get all of the assignments completed. We're already in week 3, so there's only, I think, including spring break and including finals week, there's 10 weeks total. So we're a third of the way done with class almost, which is fine. We still have plenty of time and plenty of points in the class. But just be sure that you're doing all of the assignments each week, that you're watching the lecture video, and if you have any questions, be sure to ask me sooner rather than later. All right? As always, I'm excited about reading your work, and if you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, I look forward to reading your papers and your discussion forums, and I will talk to you all again soon. Welcome back from spring break.